If you own rental property in Massachusetts, especially in Fall River, you're currently standing on a landmine. Your equity, your cash flow, and your retirement are being liquidated by a three-headed monster of regulation, oversupply, and tax shifts. There's a lot of things happening that you need to know going into 2026. And most importantly, what you can do about it and come out successful. Are you ready? Let's jump into it. So, the first up on the list is the rent control nuclear option. Okay. There is a ballot measure on the 2026 ballot in Massachusetts for rent control. Now, somehow they snuck this thing in. They needed 75,000 signatures. They got about 124,000. So there's massive organized momentum. Okay. And they want to cap what you can increase rents by on a yearly basis. Okay. So the rate of inflation up to a maximum of 5%. That's what they want to add. So this now is the government telling you what you can charge. And guys, this is not a political video, but to understand investing, to understand where things are going, you have to understand the things that are at play in the political world. Okay. So I'm not telling you to take a stand, but I want you to understand here kind of what's happening. And this is a crazy bill. That's why I started off with it. Okay. So they want to cap it, but they put some things in here, and we'll go right here. This is right off the mass.gov website. This is their proposal. Okay. So not see the annual increase of the CPI of 5%. Now, if you watch my videos, you know the CPI is a made up number. The Trump administration is going to do everything in their power, as will any presidential administration, to keep that CPI number as low as possible. So it's not going to be 5%. It's going to be that 2-3% made up number that they give you. That's the real amount they're going to let you. But what's crazy, the craziest thing in here, okay, is they're going to use the rent amount in place as of January 31st, 2026. Now, if you know anything about rental laws in Massachusetts, you know that to increase a tenant's rent, if they're a tenant at will, there is a time limit. You have to give them one rental period notice. This thing was snuck in the end of November, beginning of December, right? That's when it started making the rounds a couple of weeks ago when people started finding out what was in here. And there really is no way to put a rent increase in for January 31st. You had to get that in before December, right? Because February is the new month. So if you submit a rent increase in December, you're really increasing it in February. So that was very tricky. Whoever put that in there, that was a very purposeful date. But what's interesting though is they're gonna mark the rents as of January 31st. This bill is going to be voted on in the November midterm election. So what happens between now and November? If you just, because it's legal to raise rents, if you're a landlord and you raise rents in the meantime, what do you do if this bill passes potentially a year later, right? It might not get signed in until January of 2027. Do you have to go back in time to what your rents were in 2026, right? And then the craziest thing of all is this. They're asking for Chapter 93A, which is Consumer Protection Act. Massachusetts has a very strict law, Chapter 93A, to protect consumers. And they're asking for any suits brought under this law to be brought under 93A, which would give triple damages. So if you happen to raise, so I don't know, what I see here is if this passes, every landlord is probably going to get sued. It's going to be a field day, okay? It's going to cap rents. They're going to tell you what you can charge for your apartments. And there's some exemptions, right? They were nice enough to put exemptions, right? Some of the exemptions they're going to tell you, owner-occupied buildings with 4 or fewer units, right? But think about that. If you're an owner-occupied building with 4 or fewer units and you're exempt from rent control, but the entire market that you live in, 80 to 90% of your competition is subject to rent control, your rent is capped. Who's going to pay you 30% more than anybody else to live in your apartment, which typically is not as nice as the buildings that are newer, right? So what was surprising was Maura Healey actually came out against this, which I was surprised by, right? But she said in the name of developers and people won't build en masse. There's so many bad things about rent control. I would encourage all of you to do your research on rent control. Look at what happened in New York City, California, other jurisdictions where rent control is allowed. Okay. Definitely something to keep on the radar. My personal feeling, 10% chance that it passes, but it's in the general election. So anybody can vote on this. So it's kind of a crapshoot at that point. It's going to come down to who's got the better marketing, guys. Okay. The next thing you got to know about is there was this article that came out not too long ago, right? Earlier this week, actually. And it was about what happened in Austin, Texas, right? So, and around the country. So they looked at places where a lot of supply was added, a lot of rental supply, and what happened to rents. So Austin, Texas is the big one, right? And I've talked about Austin for about a year or two now. If you watched my video last year, you saw the same thing. That was something we're keeping on our radar. And I'm going to show you that we're already seeing some effects in Fall River. So they added over a 5-year span, almost 7% to their unit count. And the rent change was 15% reduction in rents. So basically a 2-to-1 correlation. Okay. That's a big deal. So if you read this article, luxury apartments are bringing rent down, right? That's a big deal. And you can see, that's the most dramatic one, but Nashville, Tennessee, about a little less than 1-to-1. Charlotte, North Carolina, 6% added, 5% drop in rents. Salt Lake City. So there's been a lot of development in Fall River, Massachusetts, right? Here's an article from today about 400 more market rate apartments coming to Fall River. We know, right? And so it's a double-edged sword, right? You don't want to invest in a community that nobody's investing in. But if there's too much new stock being built, then it could be detrimental because the buildings that you own, the 3 families, the 6 families, the 12 families, the older units, eventually you get a lot of competition. I'll show you in a minute. We also know the waterfront is coming, right? There's 20 acres on the waterfront getting developed, potentially another 1,500 new apartments. So just some quick napkin math, Fall River's got approximately 26,000 rental units, okay? And I would say over the last 5 years, since 2021 until about 2030, let's say there's 5,000 units that are being added of supply, okay? That's about a 20% supply surge. If we go back to this Austin, Texas ratio, right, where like the rent decrease was double the supply surge, that's potentially a 40% reduction in rents on top of rent control. You know what I mean? It's crazy, right? And you're like, Dave, what are you saying? Listen, we're seeing it now. The reality is our vacancy rate is only 3.4% on our managed units right now, okay? But we're seeing that these rentals are taking longer and longer to close. Now, if you look at the trend line here on Rent Cafe, you can see Fall River kind of peaked out over the summer, and you can see the line is just starting to curve down right here. It's hard to see, but this orange line is just starting to curve down, and we're seeing it. And I would encourage all of you, go on apartments.com and do a search for Fall River. This is your competition, guys. This is why there's a lot of pressure on these existing units, okay? Cornell Mill. This is the first page of apartments.com. Do the search yourself. You'll see what I mean. This is what your tenant pool is seeing. Cornell Mill, King Philip Lofts, new conversion, Riverview Tower, okay? That's an older one, but it's been redone. Sacred Heart Lofts, new conversion. Slave Farm Residences in Somerset, brand new build. Ashworth Lofts, mill conversion. Downtown Lofts, these are all brand new market rate units in a converted building. President Village has been around for a little while, but again, it's they're redoing their units. Royal Crest Estates, again, a big apartment complex. South Winds Apartments, okay, Lafayette Lofts, beautiful new conversion, okay, of a school. Commonwealth Landing Lofts, that was done, one of the first ones, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. Four Winds Apartments, okay, Alden Lofts, South Coast Landings, Cornell Mill, the creative class right here downtown. The first apartment you see in a traditional multifamily existing stock is this one on Plymouth Ave. And I don't know who the heck listed this building, but buddy, your photo's sideways. You know what I mean? But that's the first one you see. So that's your competition. $1,500 for a 1-bedroom with a sideways picture, okay? For $250 more, they can live in that. So there's definitely, I can tell you with extreme certainty what we're seeing right now in the market. The past 2 months, vacancies are taking longer to fill. We're getting less of the better applications. The better tenant pool that we've had a huge selection of are now trading up for these bigger buildings. So it's more important than ever that you price your units right. But it's now you can't drop your rents too much right now because you got to hedge for rent control, which means we may have to keep some vacancies going just for a little bit until we get past January 31st, just in case, and then maybe drop the rents. So knowing that that's a potential thing on the horizon, we have to account for that. Okay. The next thing hitting people, all right, is number 3, the great property tax hijack. Okay. So Boston City Council just approved a 13% residential hike in spite of Proposition 2.5, which caps the increases at 2.5% a year, right? They were able to get around that. So 13%. And this is right off their site, guys. All right. Apparently the city of Boston needs $4.8 billion a year to run. Okay. And spending, you can see going up. But the crazy thing right here, let me show you. Overall spending up. Okay. But this is the one I wanted to show you on here. Where did it go? Property taxes. I think it's on the next page. Right here. Property tax levy increase since 2013 to 2026. Guys, if that was a stock chart, I would love to own that stock. Okay. They are just increasing taxes. And what happened this year, they shifted the burden to residential because a lot of the commercial tax base in Boston is leaving. Okay. They're leaving the city. And that's not good. So they're sending it to the residents. Okay. Now, what about Fall River? What's going on in Fall River? Well, the city of Fall River, their budget proposal is $452 million. Okay. $452 million, which is wild to me. All right. So you can read this budget. It's on their site. We link to it. Now, I did go, if you go to page 20, I'll scroll down and I'll show you. Okay. Couple of little tidbits here. So they chose to go a different route. Okay. Property tax total levy is basically flat. It went down $1 million. Okay. So from 140 to 139, that went down. Okay. Slightly. Now, I don't know. This doesn't allocate. I didn't see in here where it allocates residential to commercial. I don't know if that's out yet, but you can see. So they didn't really jump the tax. They had a big jump though. They had a $10 million jump from 24 to 25, but their proposal is basically flat. Okay, great. But let's dig a little deeper, guys. Okay. Where did that $1 million has to come from somewhere? Right here, motor vehicle excise tax from 8.3 million to 9.9 million. Okay. Now, the next thing, meals excise, okay, from 1.4 million to 1.8 million. Okay. So they're increasing the taxes on meals when you go out to restaurants. They're increasing the taxes on motor vehicles. Okay. Cannabis excise from 1.2 million to 1.7. So they're going to hit cannabis up for more money. All right. And then penalties and interest if you pay late. So let me ask you guys a question really quick. Do you think most tenants own cars? Do you think most tenants like to go out to eat? Do you think a lot of tenants in Fall River maybe use cannabis? So while they're not increasing the property taxes directly, right, we're shifting the burden to the tenants. So these are hidden taxes. So every extra dollar your tenant pays for their car excise or their lunch is $1 that cannot go towards your rent. Do you see what I mean? So it's the same idea. These communities are just raising taxes ad nauseum. So we're going to have a law that says you can only charge this month this much money for your good or service because this is the number we've deemed, and we're going to tax you to death on top of that, right? And we got more on taxes coming up. Okay, so the next thing that I think is going to play into Massachusetts, number 4 on our list, is the demand cliff and funding failure. Okay, so we saw over the last few years, which we should go here first. Let's go here first. So HUD came out with the report recently that immigration accounts for up to 100% of housing demand growth in some regions and for 2/3 of rental demand growth nationwide. In California and New York, immigrants have accounted for 100% of all rental growth and over 1/2 of all growth in owner-occupied housing in recent years. This is right out of the HUD report, guys. That's it. Housing and Urban Development put this report out. It's 127 pages. We'll have it linked in our blog. Okay, what does that mean? Right? Massachusetts, California, New York, all very similar. Okay, so a lot of the demand that we saw the last few years potentially was driven by immigration. What other things did we have in Massachusetts? Well, we had the shelters, right? So in July, all the hotel shelters closed and they sent everybody packing. with $30,000 vouchers for 2 years. Okay, so that drove a lot of demand. Okay, a lot of landlords jumped on that. We looked at it. There was things about it that I didn't like. I just didn't like how it wasn't really guaranteed. I wasn't sure how guaranteed the money was. I didn't like how, with Section 8, it's forever, basically, right? Like as long as the tenant qualifies, this is a 2-year thing that could be used in 9 months, could be used in 24 months. There's a potential to extend it. But what I was kind of afraid of was this article right here in the Boston Globe. Just look at this right here, right? So here's Massachusetts resettled thousands of homeless families in apartments. Now some can't pay rent. So they use the stipend up, like this girl right here they talk about. Her funds dried up just 10 months into the possible 2-year rental subsidy. That was what concerned me about it. So now that this whole demand factor, with what HUD is saying, that accounted for potentially 100% of the rental growth in states like California and New York, which I would classify Massachusetts into that category, is now gone, right? And these funding mechanisms that were kind of falsely keeping these people in places to live, propping up the economy, propping up the demand, are starting to run out, right? The states are running out of money. We saw what happened in Minnesota. A lot of fraud was rampant in childcare services and stuff like that. I don't know. We may find out there was a lot of fraud in home base, but whatever it is, those mechanisms are gone. So you may have tenants, just like Nadine here, whose funds dried up. They never really got their situation dialed in. Now there's crackdowns on if people can work depending on their status. And now you just signed up for an eviction. I don't know. I don't know what's going to come out of that. But it is very interesting. And we did see a lot of demand from foreigners over the last couple of years for apartments. So that's gone now too. So that is definitely a headwind. Okay. And then finally, the last thing is the wealth exodus. Okay. So Massachusetts has had a 4% surtax on income over $1 million. Okay. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, Dave, millionaires, who cares? Okay, whatever. But who owns businesses, right? People with high net worth own businesses. They create jobs. Okay. A lot of these people will vote with their feet and they will leave. So again, look at what happened in Boston. Why is Boston in the position that it's in? Because all their businesses are left, right? A lot of businesses are left. So the city's tax base was gone. So Massachusetts already has this 4% surtax. They want to it's basically another tax and rent control. Okay. They want to increase your property taxes ad nauseum. All right. And now there's something in California. And when you look at the correlation of California to Massachusetts, a lot of things that happen in California first come to Massachusetts second. Okay. So Ro Khanna, he's a representative in California, and he's trying to propose basically wealth confiscation. Okay, so what that means, they want a one-time 1% tax on billionaires, or 5%, I'm sorry, 5%, minimum 5% one-time tax on billionaires, even on unrealized gains. There's been a lot of debate on this the last 2 days on Twitter. Bottom line is that they want to hit the people with the most resources to try to make up for the budget shortfall. But these people are the ones who create businesses, create jobs, inject capital in the community, buy properties, create development, right? This waterfront development in Fall River this is the type of people that are paying for this. You know what I mean? So this is a bad policy. And if they bring this to Massachusetts, if this passes in California, and when you see policies like this with rent control and they try to build this class warfare, these are all things that are going to come down and they're going to impact landlords. And it doesn't matter how small mom and pop landlord you are. Like I told you before with this rent control thing, even though they try to carve out these exceptions for you, if the entire market is in that boat, you're part of that boat. You're not going to win, So what I thought was funny was the New Hampshire troll Massachusetts and nominated Maura Healey for Person of the Year. All right. So that's, those are the headwinds coming your way. So, if you're a landlord in Massachusetts, what do? How do you survive? Well, I'm going to tell you how you survive. All right. It's more important than ever right now to have a professional team on your side. Right. And that's what Fortified Realty Group is. We are on top of these trends. We know how to navigate around them. We're able to spot the opportunities and the pitfalls for landlords. All right. You need a team that you can collaborate with. Now's not the time to go, looking for discount management. Now's not the time to try to be a weekend warrior and do it yourself. If you don't know what you're doing, if you have a lot of experience, fine. Hey, hopefully my content is helpful. I want to educate people. I want to show people what's happening. Hopefully that's helpful. And you can take that and use it, right? But more importantly than ever, you need a team that you can collaborate with, that understands what's happening and knows how to navigate it and has systems in place. So that's what I would encourage you to do. All right. Make sure, do a little gut check out your processes. And if you need help, Fortified Realty Group is here. We obviously understand what's happening. We understand the trends. We watch these things from a macro point of view, and we bring you this stuff and we educate you. All right, guys. So if you need help, reach out, check out the site. All the links are below, and good luck with everything. And comment below. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my, my thought process on this is wrong. Who knows? I'd love to get into a conversation. So comment below. Again, not political, but you have to understand the macro environment, the economy, and what the forces are and what the messaging is to try to put it all together so you can be successful, right? Because you worked hard to make that investment and you deserve to be successful, okay? And so do your tenants. Your tenants deserve a great place to live. And that's the irony of rent control, right? Is like people vote for that and they want those things to keep the rent down, but then there's no incentive to provide a better place to live for people. All right, guys. So good luck with that. 2026 is going to be an exciting year, but a couple of headwinds. So keep one eye open, keep your head on a swivel. And if you need help, holla at your boy. Happy New Year.